Good morning, everyone. Watch this episode of Morning Minutes to hear the do's and don'ts of buying commercial property, what to look for, some of the horror stories where owners have lost half the value of their property overnight. Thank you.
More than meets the eye, bird. More than meets the eye.
I can't believe you still got this. Welcome, everyone, to Morning Minutes, episode 1389. Myself, Michael Bergio, Mark Novak, buying commercial property, what to look for. This topic was actually requested by a friend of mine. And I find this is very common where a lot of people know what to look for when buying residential people. Everybody knows an agent or a friend of an agent in real estate. So it can be very easy to get information. You just Google what to look for buying residential property and you can get a very thorough list. But commercial property is not necessarily the same, is it, Mark?
It sort of like feels, hey, like when you go through a residential, you get a feeling and you've known that your whole life, what feels good and doesn't feel good. But commercial's not that at all. It's got to be backed up with, is it science, numbers? There's stuff that goes into it and you'd think, I never knew that.
Just quickly, run us through the main things when you're looking at a residential property that people look for, apart from the emotional side of it.
I think when you go through and you feel good in a place, you're like, yep, natural light. You'll go, yep, good sized balcony. You'll say, what a lovely yard, or it looks nice from the street. The kitchen and bathroom are modern, so a lot of it's very visual. And I think inherently you know what you like and don't like when it comes to living in a place. I guess you call that experience, or the homes you've lived in or places you've visited. That's your reference point. But it's not the same in buying commercial property.
No, so unlike residential, you get a strata report, you may get a builder report, and obviously have your solicitor check the contract. But a big part, I think one of the glaring differences is the tenancy profile. When you're looking to buy a residential property, if it's rented or not rented is here nor there. And if it is rented, you mainly only ask two questions, which is how much does it get and how long's the lease? And it really doesn't go much deeper than that. But when buying commercial property, and where I've seen owners lose half the value of their property overnight, is through the tenancy. A lot of value for a commercial property is brought by the income that tenant is paying for the shop. So when you're looking to buy a commercial property, you need to ask, well, who's the tenant? How long have they been within that property? And sort of do a bit of a brief overview of the strength of their business.
Yeah.
Then you've also got to look at, well, how much rent are they paying? And would that be achievable again? That's not a big question in residential. If you hear a unit's getting $500 a week, you just assume you're going to get $500, $480, $520. But in commercial property, they may be getting $500 a week, but you may only be able to get $200 a week if that property came empty now, and that would have a big impact on your property and the value.
So you've almost got to conduct your own market appraisal of what that property would rent for, even if it's got a tenant in there. You got to go, okay, what's the likelihood? So you're doing an appraisal. Then I think you got to do a check on the tenant, because there's so much value that's weighted on that tenancy being on that property. You're actually paying more because they're in there. So then you want to make sure that how is their business and who are they, and very different to residential.
Correct. And when this allows the opportunity for people to get burnt, but it also allows the opportunity for people to make some great investments and make some great money, where typically in residential, to increase the value, yes, you can do all the cosmetic changes. Let's say we're talking about an apartment. You can do all the cosmetic changes with renovating the kitchen, renovating the bathrooms. But within commercial property, you may look at a shop for sale, and you may own a property nearby, or you've seen a property rent for say $800 a week, and the property you're looking to buy, you've noticed it's only getting $500 a week. So you buy that property knowing you could get a higher tenant in there, and that 30% is effectively 30% in capital growth. So sometimes in residential, you've got to wait 5 years. In commercial, you can get that overnight.
And I guess you get people punting. You almost like it's almost punting on horses a little bit. Probably, your clients are buying properties. They look at it and go, actually, you know what? I reckon I can actually add value to this if I make this one premises, two premises. Do you know what I mean? And then they rent them out separately. They push those rents up, and then there's a value add there. So very different to the resis, totally, when you look at it that way.
So tenancy profile is a big part, looking when to buying, and then also the rental yield, the cap rate is some of the internal dialogue. You may hear agents or referring to a property, and we all sort of look at the interest rate we're paying on a mortgage. You're getting a loan, you're paying 6%. Now the cap rate is a rental return that if you're looking at a commercial shop, let's say the income is $60,000 a year, and you can buy it for $1 million. That's got a rental return of 6%. Now, different areas will charge different rates. So, for example, down at DY Beachfront, you may see a strata property have a rental return of 4 to 5%. But then let's say using Pittwater Road in DY, so only a couple kilometres away, they may be between sort of 6 to 7% yields. So knowing what type of yield should be on the type of property based on its location is a big thing as well. Because if you're a new buyer to an area, you may see the Pittwater Road property it's at a 5.5%, comparing it to the beachfront at 4%, thinking it's a great buy, but in fact, it should be at a much higher yield. So that's a key factor, knowing what yields go on what type of properties. And the easiest conversion, if you're on the residential mindset, think of those waterfront properties. They're the ones that will be on the lowest yield, those luxury properties, and more your typical standard 2-bedroom apartment would be on that typical higher yield of 6 to 7%. When interest rates around COVID, we saw that was around 5 to 6%. So there has been an upward pressure on the yields, and a lot of that's from, like, Mark, what was COVID? Commercial loans are at 3%, and now they're 6, 7, 8, 9%. So it all plays a factor.
Yeah, the interest rate swings in that. Now, Michael, there's, in terms of when buying and mistakes people make, there are, and those yields you're talking about, there are different yields for different assets as well. So, for instance, if you're buying a United service station as an investment, it would be a different yield or a different type of buyer than if you're buying the office asset class or the industrial asset class or the retail asset class. So offices as an asset class, they also hold different yields as well. They get a different rate of return on what you're buying them for. Yeah,
it can be definitely very intimidating from someone for the first time, the outside looking in. So just like before, I used the example of 2 strata shops, one beachfront, one on a main road, how that could be different yields. Now you take the same property and you go, well, you put Commonwealth Bank in there as one tenant, and then you may put a physio as another tenant or an accountant. Each of those, even though it's the same property, because of the tenant within the property, you can expect a different sale yield as well. And that can show you the power when you own one of these properties, how important tenant selection is. You could have both tenants paying $50,000 a year, and with Commonwealth Bank as your tenant, you sell that for $1.1 million, or as an accountant in there, you're selling it at $900,000, for example. And a lot of that is brought on by the perception of security for that buyer. A lot of people will look at an asset that has a national banked, like a bank backing it, or like a KFC, or some of these more public sector, what do we call them? Like your A grade businesses renting the property. People tend to see a bit more security compared to potentially a business run by one person. And we saw it a lot during COVID, just how quickly a lot of those closed, where it was the publicly traded companies, they weren't as quick to close.
Michael, how long have you been doing commercial for?
Just over, close to 14 years now. Yeah.
You got $5 million in all the beaches commercial purchase. What would you buy?
What I say to 5 million, a big building with lots of little tenants, having a good mixture. I can definitely see the appeal where some buyers go, if I've got 5 million,
industrial or commercial?
Industrial would be the best market at the moment. But if you can find a mixed-use building which has a combination of industrial, offices, and retail, that is the best long-term. Because even in my career, I've seen swings where retail was the hottest commodity and warehousing was the toughest to lease and sell. And now we're seeing industrial as one of the most premium and retail struggling. So if you can get a building with lots of little tenants, especially because what people need to understand with commercial property, it doesn't matter if you buy the beachfront building or you're buying a property on a busy main road, it can always there's always vacancy. There's not one asset class that I can go, that always rents within a week. Nearly every style of property, yes, it can be found. Yes, you can find a tenant within a week, but typically you've got 3 to 6 months vacancy. So if you can imagine, if you've got a building with lots of tenants, you may never have 100% income efficiency, but you may always live between 90 to 95 rather than buying one big property with one tenant and then you've got vacancy for three months up to a year. So I like having littler tenants. And I always say with residential, the mindset is I can get a loan for 95%. I've got 5%. I'll get a loan for the rest. With commercial, buy a cheaper price point and have a far less of a loan. So typically the banks already want to see a 30% deposit. Try and do 50 to 70% deposit and protects you against that vacancy, because a lot of people will pay a premium. Like, just a quick story. I had a shop empty, which was going to be sold for $700,000. I found a tenant and then sold it for $910,000 a week later. So you can look at that from two ways.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 20% capital growth or even more within 7 days based on the tenancy profile. So you could look at it going, well, if I just buy that property vacant and find the tenant, I can make that $200,000. So that's where you can buy.
What would you buy for $2 million? Horrible mistakes when buying property.
What was that? Sorry.
What would you buy for What would you buy for $2 million?
What would I buy for $2 million?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's anything really with the right, like offices can work, retail. There's no specific. I think it's easier. What wouldn't I buy? And it's something that's got a very specific use, is where you're trying stay away from, like, let's say, for example, it was fitted out for not a restaurant, but like I know in the past, like a meat packing premises where it's got lots of cool rooms, very specific floor fit outs, very specific room fit outs. That would probably be one of the don'ts. Try not to buy something that's too specific, where it will only appeal to one or two tenants, because then it makes it very hard to find a new tenant. The best commercial properties sometimes are just an empty box, and then it appeals to any tenant. A cafe could go in there, a physio could go in there. So the question's easier the other way around.
There. Mr. Burjo, I hope you help people out there today. I got a funny feeling it's hard to get this advice, guys. It is very hard. So to have someone 14 years experience talking about it, love it. Good on you, Booch.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Hey, Luke,
See
thank
ya.
you.
Take care.